let me give you some examples of the kinds of things that we find all the time. Any individual who's excavating at a tell will typically find a small bucket full of pottery pieces over the course of a day. We every day clean them, the following day read them, and we stay on top of them all the time. We're keeping a constant database of what we find in terms of our pottery and where we found it, at what level we found it, in what square we found it, so we keep very careful records. What we look for in particular is a rim piece, because a rim piece is a diagnostic piece. It helps you understand the whole pot. So for example, here is a rim piece. And if I had a straight edge here, when you throw a pot on a wheel, the top is always flat. So the result is if you put this on a straight edge and you turn it to where there's no light, that is the original shape of the pot. So this is how this pot was shaped. So we're looking at a cross section of the rim. And you can see that this is what we call an open vessel. The vessel starts to slope inward, and in your imagination you can follow it down, can't you? You can follow it down. It's going to go like this and like this. In other words, this is a great big bowl. If you now look from the top view, you can see the curvature of the piece, this big bowl. And what you see is there's not much curvature here. So the diameter of this you can begin to imagine, can't you, by just looking at this? The diameter of this bowl is going to be something like this. In other words, this is a very large punch bowl shaped object. We have a word for that. In pottery, we call it a crater. So this is a crater. Notice there's a very thick rim. It's also thick pottery. It would be a very heavy vessel to carry around. But the idea was you don't carry it around. You leave it on a table, you fill it up with, typically this is where you would mix water and wine, typically about 8 to 10 to 1, water to wine. And then you would have this big rim that when you wanted to carry it away after you had drunk the contents, then that's what you would have. So this is a crater. What is the date of this crater? Well, it's hard to tell. You'd have to know something about the typology of the pottery, but if you notice this shiny stuff inside, that is glaze. We know that glaze was invented by the Muslims. So this has to be at least 7th century AD. So this is post-New Testament period, at least 7th century AD crater. Here's another piece, another rim piece. This one, the attitude would be about like that. So the wall of the pot is just about straight up and down. This is a very common shape of a jug. So this pot would go like this, down, and then have a bulbous body, okay? And we're seeing the rim. You see the curvature at the top? This one is much smaller diameter than the crater we just looked at. This one perhaps is this big around. So it would go down and be like this. So this would be like a big a jug that you would use to pour water or something like that. So notice the color of the clay. It is very much a reddish color. Notice on the cross section it's very clean. There's not a lot of rock grit in it. You notice that it is well fired. It's even all the way through. You'll notice the round rim elements here. This would have one big handle on the side. So this is a jug of some sort. And this kind of jug, notice there is no glaze. So this is before the Muslim period. And indeed, with this color of pottery in this particular shape, we're talking about late 1st, early 2nd century AD. Here is a handle of a big storage jar. I found this snorkeling in the ocean off the coast of Caesarea. This is a pot that fell out of a boat. And we have here a body piece. It's a handle. So we can't tell exactly the shape of this pot, but it would have two handles. We call that an amphora. And it would be a big storage vessel that was put in a wooden rack in a ship. If you notice on the inside of this handle, which would be the outside of the pot, there are some rings, some ribbing going around that would be caused by when the pot is spinning. You could poke a stick into it a little bit and make that kind of decoration on the side. This kind of decoration was only made during two periods of time. About 1st century BC, a little before the time of Jesus, and then about 4th century AD, the Byzantine period. Because Caesarea didn't exist in the 1st century BC, and it was a busy Byzantine port, almost certainly we have here a Byzantine storage vessel. Here's a nice piece. I can't tell you much about this one, but we find them all the time. Notice the curvature of it. It's very flat in this way, curved this way. So this is a big flat-sided body piece of a storage vessel that was maybe this diameter, maybe hold grain or something like that. And we see that this is very poorly fired, very thick. This is not a high-quality piece of pottery at all. It's got lots of grit inside the pottery. This is a classic piece. We find them all the time. This dates from the time of King David, about 1000 BC. And we found this at Bethsaida, which is the ancient city of Geshur. One of David's wives, Ma'akah, was the daughter of the king of Geshur. So this vessel was being used about the time that relationship was being established. And by the way, David and that wife, Ma'akah, had a child by the name of Absalom that might be familiar to you. This is an extraordinary piece. We find these every once in a while. Doesn't look like much. Not very well fired. Not very well made. Can't really tell the shape of it very well. But I can tell you one thing for sure. If you look at the surface, you can see what looks like a comb has been scratched across the pottery. Sort of a cross-hatching pattern. We call this combed ware. Archaeologists are very creative. And what this is a typical style that was only done during one period of time, and that is early Bronze Age. That means this piece of pottery dates somewhere in the 4th millennium BC, 3000, 3500 BC. This is one old pottery from about the dawn of civilization. And then my favorite, this is an oil lamp. When Jesus talks about lighting your lamp and putting it on a lampstand and don't put it under a basket, this is what he's talking about. This is an oil lamp. Notice you would put oil in the hole here. You would put a wick in this little hole. It fits very nicely in the palm so that you won't burn your hand. And when you put it on a lampstand, what he really means is a rock that would stick out of a wall a little bit, and you would stick it on top of the rock, and that would be a place where the lamp would give light to the entire house. Notice the snout of this lamp. This triangular shape, it's quite distinctive. This is a unique kind of pottery. It is only made in Israel, only for about 30 years. We call it a Herodian oil lamp because these oil lamps were made only during the time of the sons of King Herod the Great. Well, it so happens that the sons of King Herod the Great are at precisely the time of Jesus. So whenever you see this shape, this is a diagnostic piece of pottery which tells us this dates from the time of Jesus. And of course, if you find this in a particular stratum, that stratum dates from the time of Jesus. Now, pottery is very important. Sometimes, like with a Herodian oil lamp, you can date pottery to a fairly close target. Usually, though, give or take half a century, maybe a century, is about as close as you can get with pottery dating. I also have here some coins, and we can get some close-up pictures. Here is a silver coin from Athens. You can see the famous Athenian owl and the first 3 letters of the name of Athens in Greek. This dates from the 5th century BC. This is a Roman coin with the bust of Constantine on the top. This dates from the time of the Emperor Constantine, 4th century AD. The nice thing about coins is they tend to have dates on them, or at least they have emperors' names on them, and so we can date them within a much closer range than pottery. Of course, ideally, you like to find coins will be in a context with pots. And so the coins help date the pots, which help date other pots of a similar period of time. And so this helps refine our ability to do a pottery-based chronology. So coins and pottery are both very, very important for us in our ability to get not only a relative date to know what's older and what's younger by stratification, but also an absolute date for any particular stratum.